What if a woman's mind was seen as a weapon? What if her desire for knowledge was treated as a rebellion? What if she had to pretend to be a man just to lead her own country? These are not questions from a novel. They were the reality for women in power. For centuries, queens were expected to be quiet figures. They were supposed to produce heirs, look decorative, and not have opinions. But some of them refused to play that part. They saw the world differently. They had ideas about science, law, government, and personal freedom that were so far ahead of their time, they still feel fresh today. They were women who looked at the chains society put on them and decided to make keys instead. Number 15, can culture be a form of power? Isabella d'Este was born in 1474. She never commanded an army. She never passed a sweeping law that changed the world, yet leaders and artists across Europe knew her name. She met the King of France 7 times. Leonardo da Vinci drew her portrait. She turned her small city-state of Mantua into a cultural capital. And she did it all through letters, commissions, and an unmatched eye for talent. Isabella lived during the Italian Renaissance. This was a time of great art, but also great conflict. Small states like Mantua were constantly at risk of being swallowed by larger powers like France, Spain, or the Papal States. A ruler needed more than just soldiers. They needed influence. They needed prestige. Isabella understood this better than anyone. Her husband, Francesco II Gonzaga, was a military man. He was often away fighting as a hired commander for other states. This left Isabella in charge as regent. She wasn't just a placeholder. She was an active, clever ruler. But her real genius was in what we might now call soft power. She knew that a state known for its incredible art and culture was a state that others would hesitate to destroy. It gave Mantua a reputation far bigger than its borders. She began collecting art, sculptures, and ancient artifacts with a fierce determination. She wrote thousands of letters to artists, agents, and other rulers. We still have over 12,000 of them. These letters show her incredible mind at work. She wasn't a passive buyer. She was a demanding patron. She would send painters like Andrea Mantegna and Perugino incredibly detailed instructions for her commissions. She specified the subject, the size, the figures, even the mood. She wanted a studiolo, a private study, filled with allegorical paintings that showed her as a master of virtue and intellect. It was a form of personal and political branding. When powerful visitors came to Mantua, they would be shown her collections. They would leave impressed not by Mantua's army, but by its sophistication. This was a political tool. It made her and her state seem important, civilized, and worth protecting. Her other tool was fashion. She was known as the First Lady of the world. Her style was copied by women across Italy and even in the French court. She designed her own clothes and accessories. She had dolls dressed in her latest creations sent to other courts so they could see her style. This wasn't just vanity, it was a way of extending her influence. When the Queen of France copied your hat, it meant you mattered. It was another way to keep Mantua on the map. While her husband was captured by the Venetians in 1509, Isabella ruled Mantua alone for almost a year. She successfully defended the city from the forces of the Holy Roman Emperor. She did it through sharp diplomacy, not force. She negotiated with kings and popes. She used the network of contacts she had built through her cultural pursuits. Her reputation as a woman of taste and intellect gave her a level of respect that a typical regent, especially a female one, would not have had. People listened to her because they knew she was smart. Isabella d'Este's life shows us a different kind of power. It wasn't about brute force, it was about shaping how the world saw you. She used art and fashion to build a reputation, create alliances, and protect her home. She treated culture as a vital state asset, just as important as a strong treasury or a well-drilled army. This idea that a nation's cultural influence can be a major source of its international power is a very modern concept. Isabella was practicing it 500 years ago. Number 14, how do you fight a superpower for 40 years? Njinga of Ndongo and Matamba was born in 1583 in what is now Angola. She saw the Portuguese arriving in her land. She saw them taking her people as slaves. She saw them trying to conquer her kingdom. She decided she would not let it happen. She would fight them for her entire life, and she would use every tool she had: diplomacy, espionage, and war. For almost 40 years, from the 1620s until her death in 1663, Njinga was the primary obstacle to Portuguese colonial ambitions in Central Africa. This was a time when European powers were expanding across the globe. They had superior firepower and resources. Resisting them was incredibly difficult. Sustaining that resistance for decades was almost unheard of. Njinga first came to prominence as a diplomat. In 1622, she was sent by her brother, the king, to negotiate a peace treaty with the Portuguese governor in Luanda. The Portuguese tried to intimidate her. They provided a chair for the governor, but only floor mats for her delegation. This was a power play meant to show her she was inferior, and Njinga didn't accept it. She calmly motioned for one of her servants to get on her hands and knees. Njinga then sat on the servant's back as if it were a throne, placing her at eye level with the governor. She made it clear she was his equal. She then negotiated a brilliant treaty, securing the withdrawal of Portuguese troops and the recognition of her kingdom's sovereignty. The Portuguese, of course, did not honor the treaty for long. When her brother died, Njinga seized power. Many of the Ndongo nobility refused to accept a female ruler, so Njinga did something radical. She left her traditional kingdom and moved east, conquering the kingdom of Matamba. She built a new power base there, welcoming runaway slaves and soldiers who had deserted the Portuguese. She created a powerful mobile army that was a constant threat. She was a brilliant military strategist. She understood guerrilla warfare. She would strike Portuguese-held towns and plantations, then retreat into the interior where their armies struggled to follow. She also understood the power of alliances. She reached out to the Dutch, who were rivals of the Portuguese, and formed a military alliance with them in the 1640s. Together, they briefly drove the Portuguese out of Luanda. Njinga also had to be a master of cultural adaptation. To deal with Europeans, she learned their customs and religion. She was baptized as Ana de Souza. She used this Christian name in her correspondence with them. But among her own people, she embraced traditional African titles and roles. To strengthen her position as a ruler in a male-dominated society, she took on male roles. She was referred to as king, not queen. She maintained a group of male wives and dressed as a man in battle. This was not about personal identity as we understand it today. It was a political strategy to command the respect and loyalty of her warriors. She fought the Portuguese until she was in her late 70s. She never gave up. She eventually negotiated another treaty that recognized her as the ruler of Matamba and secured a fragile peace. She died in 1663 at the age of 80, still in control of her kingdom. She had spent a lifetime resisting a global empire. Her story is one of incredible resilience and strategic genius. She showed that a determined leader, using a combination of diplomacy, military skill, and cultural flexibility, could stand up to a seemingly unstoppable force. Her long struggle was a masterclass in how to fight for sovereignty against overwhelming odds. Number 13, can a woman command an army in a man's world? And Matilda of Tuscany lived in the 11th century. This was the height of the feudal age. A woman's role was to marry, have children, and manage a household. Power, especially military power, was for men. Matilda of Tuscany did not follow these rules. She inherited vast lands in northern Italy. She became one of the most powerful and feared feudal lords of her time, and she led her own armies into battle. She was born in 1046 into a noble family that controlled a huge territory stretching from Lombardy to Tuscany. This made her land strategically vital. They lay directly between Germany, the seat of the Holy Roman Emperor, and Rome, the seat of the Pope. In her lifetime, the Emperor and the Pope were locked in a massive struggle for power called the Investiture Controversy. It was a fight over who had the ultimate authority to appoint bishops. It was the central political conflict of the age. Matilda was a devout supporter of the Pope. Okay? From a young age, she was taught politics, diplomacy, and military strategy. When her father and brother died and her mother was taken prisoner, the young Matilda became the key figure in her family's lands. Her loyalty to the Pope, particularly Pope Gregory VII, was absolute. She put her wealth and her military at his service. This was not a passive role. She didn't just fund armies, she led them. Contemporary accounts describe her as being present at battles, riding at the head of her troops, and directing strategy. This was shocking for the time. Noblewomen were not supposed to be on the battlefield. Matilda was not just a figurehead. She was a commander. Her knights and soldiers were loyal to her personally. She successfully defended her lands against the armies of the Holy Roman Emperor, Henry IV, on multiple occasions. Her most famous moment came in 1077. Pope Gregory VII had excommunicated Emperor Henry IV. This was a devastating political move that threatened to cost Henry his throne. And Henry crossed the Alps in the middle of winter to beg the Pope for forgiveness. The Pope was staying at Matilda's castle in Canossa. For 3 days, the Emperor stood barefoot in the snow outside the castle gates as a penitent. It was Matilda who mediated the meeting between them. The most powerful secular ruler in Europe was a guest, and in some ways a supplicant, in her fortress. The scene at Canossa showed her immense political importance. Matilda was married twice, both for political reasons. She dominated both of her husbands. Her first husband, Godfrey the Hunchback, sided with the emperor. They became estranged and lived apart. Her second husband was a 17-year-old boy, Welf V of Bavaria, whom she married when she was in her 40s. It was a purely political alliance to counter the emperor. When he realized she would not give him any real power, they also separated. She controlled her own life and her own lands. She did not cede authority to any man. She ruled for nearly 40 years. She was a shrewd administrator, a skilled diplomat, and a proven military leader. In a world where women were seen as fragile and incapable of leadership, Matilda proved everyone wrong. She showed that a woman could wield feudal power as effectively as any man. She was not a queen in title, but she commanded more power and respect than many kings of her day. Her life was a testament to the idea that leadership is about ability, not gender. And number 12 is intellectual power, a form of statecraft. When we think of Cleopatra VII, we often think of beauty and romance. That is the version sold by Shakespeare in Hollywood. The reality is far more interesting. Cleopatra was not primarily a seductress. She was a scholar and a diplomat. Her greatest weapon was not her face, it was her brain. She ruled Egypt from 51 to 30 BC, a time when the Roman Republic was becoming an empire and swallowing up every kingdom in its path. Cleopatra's goal was to keep Egypt independent and strong. She used her intellect to do it. One of her most significant, yet least known, strengths was her gift for languages. The Ptolemaic dynasty to which she belonged was Greek. For 300 years, her ancestors had ruled Egypt without ever bothering to learn the Egyptian language. They ruled as foreigners. Cleopatra was the first and only member of her dynasty to speak Egyptian, but she didn't stop there. The historian Plutarch wrote that she could speak at least 9 languages, including those of the Ethiopians, Hebrews, Arabs, and Parthians. This was a stunning diplomatic advantage. When ambassadors from these nations came to her court, she could speak to them directly, without an interpreter. This built trust and respect. It also meant her words could not be twisted or misunderstood by a translator. It showed a deep respect for other cultures, which was a powerful tool for building alliances. In a world dominated by Greek and Latin, her linguistic skill was a statement. It said that Egypt was not just a Greek colony, but a cosmopolitan power at the center of the world. Cleopatra was also highly educated in many other fields. She was raised in Alexandria, which was home to the greatest library in the ancient world. It was the intellectual center of the Mediterranean. She studied mathematics, philosophy, astronomy, and medicine. She even wrote a medical treatise on cosmetics and pharmacology, fragments of which were cited by later physicians like Galen. She was, in effect, a scientist queen. This intellectual background shaped her rule. She understood economics. She reformed Egypt's currency to stabilize the economy. She understood agriculture. She managed the country's grain supply, which was vital not just for Egypt, but for Rome as well. Control over Egypt's grain gave her immense leverage. She also understood public relations. She presented herself to the Egyptian people not as a Greek queen, but as the reincarnation of the goddess Isis. This connected her to the ancient traditions of the pharaohs and strengthened her legitimacy among her native subjects. Her relationships with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony were not just romantic, they were political and intellectual partnerships. Caesar was a brilliant general and politician, but he was also a writer and an intellectual. They likely spent hours discussing politics, history, and strategy. With Antony, she co-ruled the eastern half of the Roman world for a decade. Their partnership was based on a shared vision of a Hellenistic empire with Alexandria as its capital. Cleopatra used her knowledge to try and save her kingdom from Roman conquest. She failed in the end, but she came closer than anyone else. For over 20 years, she kept Egypt independent through sheer force of will and intellect. She was a master of diplomacy, finance, and propaganda. She showed that a ruler's mind could be their most powerful asset. Her real story is not about seduction. It's about a brilliant woman using her intelligence to play the great game of power at the highest level. Number 11, can a woman lead an army and build a trade empire? In the 16th century, in what is now northern Nigeria, there was a kingdom called Zazzau. It was one of the Hausa city-states, and it was ruled by a woman named Amina. She was not a regent or a queen consort. She was the commander-in-chief, the head of state, the master strategist. Her legacy is so powerful that she is still remembered in the region as Amina, a woman as capable as a man. Amina was born around 1533. Her mother was a queen who ruled Zazzau, so Amina grew up in a position of power. From a young age, she honed her military skills. Instead of learning domestic tasks, she trained with the soldiers. When her brother became king, Amina became the leader of his cavalry. She was already a fierce and respected warrior. When her brother died around 1576, Amina became queen. She did not spend her time in the palace. Within 3 months of taking the throne, she launched her first military campaign. And she did not stop for the next 34 years. Her goal was not just to conquer, it was to expand and control the profitable trade routes that crossed the region. Amina's army was formidable. She is credited with introducing metal armor, including helmets and chainmail, to her soldiers. She personally led her army of 20,000 men on campaign after campaign. She expanded the territory of Zazzau further than any ruler before her. She conquered large parts of Hausaland and brought the powerful states of Kano and Katsina under her control. She forced them to pay tribute to Zazzau. Her military strategy was linked to an economic one. Her conquests were aimed at controlling the north-south trade in salt, horses, and metals, and the east-west trade in cola nuts. By dominating this network, she made Zazzau incredibly wealthy. She didn't just conquer a city and leave. In every area she took, she had her engineers build fortified earthen walls. These became known as Amina's walls. Many of them still exist today. These walls were not just defensive, they were a way to consolidate her control, protect trade caravans, and establish permanent Zazzau authority in the new territories. They were a physical symbol of her expanding empire. Amina never married. She never had children. She remained completely dedicated to her role as a military and political leader. This was highly unusual. Her life was the state. Her focus was on expanding its power and wealth. Her rule was a time of great prosperity and security for Zazzau. Traders could travel safely through her lands. Farmers could grow their crops without fear of raiders. Amina's story challenges many assumptions about the roles of women in pre-colonial Africa. She was not an exception who ruled through a husband or son. She was a leader in her own right, whose power came from her own military prowess and strategic vision. She built an empire through a combination of military force and economic control. She showed that a woman could be a fearsome warrior and a brilliant empire builder. Her 34-year reign was a golden age for her people, all thanks to her modern vision of linking military conquest directly to economic dominance. Number 10, can a small state challenge a superpower on its own terms? In the 3rd century AD, the Roman Empire seemed invincible. It stretched from Britain to Mesopotamia. But in the east, in the desert city of Palmyra, a queen rose up who dared to challenge Rome. Her name was Zenobia. For a brief, brilliant period, she carved out her own empire from Roman territory and ruled as one of the most powerful women of the ancient world. Palmyra was a wealthy city on the edge of the Roman Empire, located in modern-day Syria. It grew rich from its position on the trade routes connecting Rome with Persia and the East. It was a client state of Rome, technically allied but with a degree of autonomy. Zenobia was the wife of its ruler, Odenathus. When Odenathus and his eldest son were assassinated in 267 AD, Zenobia took control as regent for her young son, Vaballathus. But Zenobia was no one's regent. She was the absolute ruler, and she had ambitions far beyond a small desert kingdom. The Roman Empire was in a period of crisis. It was facing internal strife and external threats. Zenobia saw an opportunity. She began to expand her power. In 270 AD, she sent her army to invade and conquer Egypt, one of Rome's most important provinces and its primary source of grain. It was an audacious move. She then took control of much of Asia Minor, modern Turkey, and the Levant. In just a few years, she had created the Palmyrene Empire. She controlled a vast territory that was vital to Rome's economy and security. At first, she maintained the fiction that she was acting on Rome's behalf. Her coins showed her son's image on one side and the Roman emperor's on the other. But soon, she dropped the pretense. She declared herself Augusta Empress and her son Augustus Emperor. It was a direct declaration of independence and a challenge to Roman authority. Zenobia's court in Palmyra was a center of learning and culture. She was highly educated and spoke multiple languages, including Greek, Aramaic, Egyptian, and Latin. She surrounded herself with philosophers and scholars, most famously Cassius Longinus. She was known for her tolerance. Her empire was a multicultural place where different religions and peoples coexisted. This was a deliberate policy to foster stability and loyalty among her diverse subjects. She presented herself not as a rebel, but as a legitimate monarch. She claimed descent from Cleopatra and the ancient kings of Syria. She was a master of propaganda, using her image and her court to project power and legitimacy. She was also known for her personal strength. She was said to march on foot with her soldiers for miles, and could drink more than her generals without getting drunk. Her rebellion could not last. In 272 AD, the Roman Emperor Aurelian marched east with a massive army. He defeated Zenobia's forces in 2 major battles. He then besieged and captured Palmyra. Zenobia was taken back to Rome as a prisoner. She was paraded through the streets in golden chains during Aurelian's triumph. Her fate afterward is uncertain. Some sources say she died on the way to Rome. Others say she was given a villa and lived out her life as a Roman noblewoman. Zenobia's reign was short, lasting only about 5 years, but her story is a powerful one. She was a woman from a provincial city who took on the greatest empire in the world. She built her own empire based on military conquest, cultural sophistication, and religious tolerance. She showed that even a seemingly invincible superpower could be challenged. Her brief, bright reign was a bold statement of sovereignty and ambition. Number 9. Can diplomacy be a greater weapon than war? Jadwiga of Poland was crowned in 1384, but she was not crowned queen. She was crowned king. This was not a mistake. The Polish nobility wanted to make it clear that she was a ruler in her own right, not just the wife of a king. She was only 10 years old at the time, yet she would go on to become one of Poland's most beloved rulers, not for waging war, but for waging peace. And Jadwiga's situation was complex. She was a Hungarian princess who had inherited the Polish throne. She was betrothed to an Austrian prince, William Habsburg. But the Polish lords had a different plan. They wanted to unite Poland with its large eastern neighbor, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. Lithuania was the last pagan state in Europe. The Polish lords saw an opportunity to create a powerful unified state that could stand up to the threat of the Teutonic Knights, a militant German religious order on their border. To achieve this, they needed Jadwiga to break her engagement to William and marry the Grand Duke of Lithuania, Jogaila. This was a huge sacrifice for a young girl. She was in love with William, but she understood her duty. She put the needs of her country before her own happiness. She agreed to the marriage. In 1386, Jogaila was baptized, married Jadwiga, and was crowned King of Poland alongside her. This union created the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which would become one of the largest and most powerful states in Europe for centuries. This single diplomatic act was Jadwiga's greatest achievement. It peacefully converted a huge territory to Christianity and created a powerful political entity, all without a single battle. But her diplomatic skill did not end there. She spent much of her short reign using negotiation and mediation to solve conflicts. The most persistent threat came from the Teutonic Knights. They constantly raided Polish and Lithuanian territory. While her husband Jogaila often favored a military solution, Jadwiga consistently pushed for peace talks. She personally led delegations to meet with the Knights' leaders. She was known for her calm, intelligent, and firm negotiating style. She would use her deep knowledge of law and treaties to argue Poland's case. She managed to avert several potential wars through her diplomatic efforts. Jadwiga was also a great patron of learning and charity. She believed that education was essential for a strong nation. Her most lasting legacy in this area was the restoration of the University of Krakow. The university had been founded earlier, but had fallen into decline. Jadwiga donated all of her personal jewelry and royal insignia to provide the funds to reestablish it. She secured the Pope's permission to add a vital theology department, which made it a true European university. After her death, her husband used the funds to complete the project. The university, now known as the Jagiellonian University, is one of the oldest and most respected in the world. She also funded hospitals, churches, and helped the poor. She was known for her personal piety and kindness. She died in 1399 at the age of just 25, following complications from childbirth. Her reign was short, only 15 years. But her impact was immense. She showed that a ruler's strength could lie in wisdom, not warfare. She'd built a powerful state through marriage, converted a nation through diplomacy, and secured her country's future through education. Her choice to be crowned king was symbolic of her power, but her modern view was that the best way to use that power was through peace. Number 8, do all women deserve legal protection? Theodora was born around 500 AD. She was not a princess. She was the daughter of a bear keeper at the Hippodrome in Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire. She became an actress and a dancer. In that society, this was a scandalous profession considered only slightly better than prostitution. Yet she would rise to become the empress, wife of the great Emperor Justinian, and one of the most powerful women in history. And she never forgot where she came from. She used her power to champion the rights of the most vulnerable women in her empire. Her marriage to Justinian was a scandal in itself. He was the heir to the throne. She was a woman from the lowest rungs of society. Byzantine law forbade a man of senatorial rank from marrying an actress. Justinian was so determined to marry her that he had his uncle, the Emperor Justin I, repeal the law. They married in 525 AD. When Justinian became emperor 2 years later, he insisted that Theodora be crowned not as a consort, but as his co-ruler, his Augusta. Her intelligence and strength of character were legendary. Her most famous moment came during the Nika riots of 532 AD. A massive revolt broke out in Constantinople. The city was in flames. Justinian's generals and advisors urged him to flee. The escape boats were ready. It was Theodora who stood up in the council and refused to go. She gave a powerful speech, saying she would rather die an empress than live as an exile. She famously said that royal purple is the noblest shroud. Her courage shamed the men into staying. Justinian ordered his general Belisarius to crush the revolt. The throne was saved, and it was saved because of Theodora. After this, her influence was undeniable. She was Justinian's most trusted advisor, but her personal project was to improve the status of women through law. Having seen the exploitation women faced in her former profession, she was determined to give them legal protection. She championed a series of laws that were incredibly progressive for the 6th century. She pushed for a law that made the abduction of women, for any reason, a capital crime. This applied to men of all social classes. She created a convent called the Metanoia Repentance, which was a safe house for former prostitutes. It gave them a place to live and a way to leave their old lives. This was a radical act of empathy. She also influenced laws that expanded the rights of women in divorce. Women were given more power to own and inherit property. A law was passed allowing women to keep their dowry after their husband's death. Another law made it illegal to force a woman into the theater against her will. These laws chipped away at the old Roman legal tradition that treated women as the property of their fathers or husbands. Theodora's reforms were based on the idea that women were individuals with rights that deserved the state's protection. Her critics, and there were many, were horrified. They saw her as an upstart who was overturning the proper social order. The historian Procopius, who hated her, wrote a secret history filled with vicious rumors about her past. But even he could not deny her power and intelligence. Theodora died in 548 AD. Justinian was said to have been heartbroken and never remarried. He continued to pass laws that reflected her influence. Theodora's life was an incredible journey from the bottom of society to the very top. She used her position to help those she had left behind. Her legal reforms were a reflection of a deeply modern view that the law should protect everyone, especially the most powerless. Number 7, should government be based on merit, not birth? Wu Zetian is the only woman in the entire history of China to rule as emperor in her own right. She broke every rule of a rigidly patriarchal Confucian society to create her own dynasty. She ruled China from 690 to 705 AD. While her path to power was ruthless, her method of governing was surprisingly modern. She believed that the best people to run the country were the smartest people, not just the ones from rich and powerful families. Wu Zetian started her career as a low-ranking concubine in the court of Emperor Taizong. After his death, she was sent to a Buddhist convent, which was the typical fate for a deceased emperor's childless concubines. But she was too ambitious for that. She managed to get back into the palace and became a concubine of the new emperor, Gaozong. Through clever political maneuvering, she rose to become his empress consort. When Emperor Gaozong suffered a stroke, she became the effective ruler of China. After his death, and after deposing her own sons, she declared herself emperor of the new Zhou dynasty. For centuries, the Chinese government had been dominated by a small group of powerful aristocratic clans from the northwest. They held all the top positions, they passed their power down through their families, they were a closed circle that was resistant to change and often put their own family interests above the interests of the state. Wu Zetian saw this as a weakness. She came from a less powerful family herself, and she knew she needed a different power base to secure her rule. Her solution was to dramatically expand and reform the imperial examination system. This system, which tested candidates on their knowledge of Confucian classics, had existed before. But it was often a formality. Under Wu Zetian, it became the primary route to a government job. She made the exams more anonymous to prevent cheating and favoritism. She increased the frequency of the exams, and she opened them up to a much wider range of candidates, including men from commoner backgrounds who had previously had no hope of a government career. She also introduced new types of exams. She held them on military strategy. She even held an examination in person in the palace to recruit talent directly. She was looking for ability, for raw talent, wherever she could find it. The result was a new class of government officials. These scholar officials owed their careers and their loyalty to her, not to the old aristocratic families. They were a meritocracy. They had proven their intelligence and were eager to serve the empress who had given them their chance. This had a profound effect on Chinese government. It made the bureaucracy more efficient and less corrupt. It brought new ideas and perspectives into the administration. It shifted the basis of power from inherited privilege to demonstrated ability. This was a radical and modern idea. The old aristocratic families hated her for it. They saw her as destroying the natural order of things. But for China, it created a more stable and capable government. Wu Zetian also used other methods to consolidate her power. She created a secret police force to eliminate her rivals. She was a master of propaganda, using Buddhist texts to predict the rise of a female sovereign. But her most lasting legacy was the transformation of the Chinese bureaucracy. The emphasis on meritocracy through examinations that she championed became a cornerstone of Chinese government for the next 1,200 years. She believed that a government should be run by the most talented people, regardless of their family name. It was a principle that fundamentally reshaped Chinese society. Number 6 is personal freedom worth more than a crown. In 1654, the people of Europe were stunned by an almost unbelievable piece of news. Queen Christina of Sweden, one of the most powerful and educated monarchs on the continent, had willingly given up her throne. She was 28 years old. She was not forced out. She was not ill. She simply decided she no longer wanted to be queen. She chose personal and intellectual freedom over a lifetime of power and duty. Christina was born in 1626, the daughter of the great warrior king Gustavus Adolphus. Her father was killed in battle when she was only 6. She was raised to be a king, not a queen. She received a rigorous education studying politics, philosophy, classics, and science. She was brilliant. When she came of age, she proved to be an intelligent and capable ruler. She was instrumental in negotiating the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, which ended the devastating 30 Years' War. But Christina was deeply unconventional. She hated the formalities of court life. She dressed in men's clothing. She refused to marry, despite constant pressure from her council to provide an heir. She famously said she could not beget a son and at the same time a hero. She was far more interested in ideas than in politics. Her dream was to turn Stockholm into the Athens of the North. She spent a fortune inviting scholars, artists, and musicians from all over Europe to her court. Her most famous guest was the French philosopher René Descartes. She would get up at 5 a.m. in the bitter Swedish winter to study philosophy with him. Her passion for knowledge was all-consuming. But she found that her duties as queen were getting in the way. The endless meetings, the ceremonies, the political squabbles, they were all a distraction from her real interests. She was also going through a deep personal and spiritual crisis. She had been raised as a strict Lutheran, the head of the Swedish state church. But her studies and conversations with Catholic scholars had led her to secretly question her faith. She found herself drawn to Catholicism. This was an impossible position for the ruler of a fiercely Protestant country that had just fought a 30-year war against Catholic powers. So she made a choice that almost no one in her time could understand. She chose herself. In 1654, she officially abdicated in favor of her cousin. In a formal ceremony, her royal robes were removed from her, piece by piece. She left Sweden, disguised as a man, and traveled across Europe. She eventually made her way to Rome, where she openly converted to Catholicism in a grand public ceremony. Her life, after abdication, was just as remarkable. She became a central figure in Roman society. She established a huge library. She became a major patron of art and music, supporting composers like Corelli and Scarlatti. She created an academy in her palace where intellectuals and artists would meet to discuss ideas. She was free. She could study what she wanted, talk to whom she wanted, and live how she wanted. She was no longer bound by the expectations of her country. Christina's abdication was a radical act of self-determination. In an age when duty, lineage, and religion defined a person's life, especially a monarch's, she insisted on the right to choose her own path. She valued intellectual and spiritual freedom more than she valued a kingdom. Her life poses a question that still feels modern. What is the ultimate purpose of a life? Is it to fulfill the role society gives you, Or is it to pursue your own personal truth, no matter the cost? And Christina's answer was clear. Number 5, can a husband and wife rule as equal partners? The marriage of Isabella I of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon in 1469 is one of the most important in European history. It led to the unification of Spain and the dawn of its golden age, but it was not a typical royal marriage where the queen was a junior partner. From the very beginning, Isabella made it clear that she would rule Castile not as Ferdinand's wife, but as its queen. Their partnership was a surprisingly balanced one, a joint rule between two ambitious and capable monarchs. When Isabella inherited the throne of Castile in 1474, her position was not secure. A civil war broke out as the King of Portugal, who was married to her niece, also claimed the throne. Ferdinand's military skill was crucial in helping Isabella win this war. But once she was securely on the throne, the question of how they would rule together had to be settled. In 1475, they signed an agreement that laid out the terms of their joint reign. It was a remarkable document. It stated that all official documents would be issued in both their names. Their images would appear together on coins. They would share power. However, it also made it clear that Isabella was the sole proprietor of Castile, as Ferdinand was, in effect, its king consort. He could not act without her consent in Castilian affairs. She, on the other hand, had more say in Aragon. This was not a merger where one kingdom absorbed the other. It was a carefully negotiated partnership. Their motto was Tanto monta, monta tanto, Isabel como Fernando. It means the one is as good as the other, Isabella as Ferdinand. This reflected their vision of an equal partnership. In practice, they had different strengths that complemented each other. Ferdinand was a cunning diplomat and a skilled military leader. Isabella was a brilliant administrator and had a powerful sense of purpose. She was deeply religious and saw her rule as a divine mission to reform and unify Spain. She took a very active role in government. She traveled constantly throughout her kingdom, holding court, dispensing justice, and reestablishing royal authority over the powerful nobles. She was obsessed with law and order. She created a new national police force, the Santa Hermandad, to make the roads safe. She reformed the kingdom's finances, which were in chaos when she took the throne. She was meticulous, hardworking, and had a clear vision for her kingdom. While Ferdinand was often away on military campaigns, Isabella ran the government. During the long war to conquer the last Muslim kingdom of Granada, she was the chief organizer. She managed the supplies for the army, raised the money to pay the soldiers, and even appeared at the military camps to boost morale. She was the quartermaster general of the war. Their most famous joint project was the funding of Christopher Columbus's voyage in 1492. While Ferdinand was skeptical, it was Isabella who saw the potential and championed the cause. The discovery of the New World would transform Spain into a global superpower. Of course, their reign had a dark side. The same year they conquered Granada and funded Columbus, they also issued the Alhambra Decree expelling all Jews from Spain. They also established the Spanish Inquisition. These actions were driven by their goal of creating a unified, purely Catholic Spain. But looking at the structure of their rule, it was unusually modern. It was a functional partnership between a man and a woman who ruled as equals. Isabella was never in Ferdinand's shadow. She was a powerful, effective ruler who commanded immense respect. She insisted on her rights as queen and created a model of joint sovereignty that was unique for its time. She showed that a marriage could be a political partnership of equals. Number 4, can a woman control her own destiny and property? Eleanor of Aquitaine was one of the most powerful figures of the 12th century. She was the Duchess of a vast and wealthy territory in southwestern France. Then she became Queen of France. Then, after divorcing the king, she became Queen of England. She was the mother of 2 English kings, Richard the Lionheart and John. She lived to be 82 years old, an incredible age for the time. Throughout her long and dramatic life, she consistently fought to control her own destiny, her own lands, and her own power, in a world that was designed to deny her all three. Eleanor inherited the Duchy of Aquitaine in 1137 when she was about 15. This made her the most eligible heiress in Europe. Her lands were larger and richer than those of the King of France. She was immediately married to the heir to the French throne, Louis II. She became Queen of France, but the marriage was a poor match. Louis was a pious, quiet man. Eleanor was energetic, intelligent, and strong-willed. She insisted on her rights as Duchess of Aquitaine. She administered her own lands. She even accompanied Louis on the Second Crusade. The presence of a queen and her ladies in waiting on a military campaign was scandalous, but Eleanor insisted on going. The crusade was a disaster, and her relationship with Louis completely broke down. She wanted out of the marriage. In the 12th century, divorce was almost impossible, but Eleanor found a way. She argued that she and Louis were too closely related. After 15 years of marriage and 2 daughters, she succeeded in, getting the marriage annulled in 1152. This was an extraordinary act of self-determination, but what was more extraordinary was what she did next. As soon as the annulment was granted, she regained sole control of her vast duchy. She was a single woman in control of one of the greatest territories in Europe. She was not single for long. Just 2 months later, she married Henry of Anjou, who was 11 years younger than her. 2 years after that, he became King Henry II of England. Eleanor was now Queen of England. Her lands, combined with his, created a massive Angevin empire that stretched from Scotland to the Pyrenees. For the first part of their marriage, they were a powerful team. She bore him 8 children, including 5 sons. But their relationship soured. Henry was a brilliant but ruthless king, and he was constantly unfaithful. He also began to sideline Eleanor, trying to rule her lands in Aquitaine directly. Eleanor would not have it. She returned to Aquitaine and set up her own court in Poitiers. This court became a famous center of culture, known for poetry and the ideals of courtly love. In 1173, she took an even more drastic step. She supported her sons in a rebellion against their father, King Henry II. The revolt failed. Henry captured Eleanor and imprisoned her. She remained his prisoner for the next 16 years. It seemed her power was finally broken, but she outlasted him. When Henry II died in 1189, her favorite son, Richard the Lionheart, became king. His first act was to free his mother. While Richard was away on the Third Crusade, and later when he was held for ransom in Germany, it was Eleanor, then in her late 60s, who effectively ruled England. She raised the massive ransom to free him. After Richard's death, she supported the claim of her youngest son, John, to the throne. She was still active in politics and diplomacy well into her late 70s. Eleanor's life was a constant struggle for autonomy. She refused to be a passive pawn in the games of men. She used marriage and annulment to control her future. She fought a king to protect her son's inheritance. She governed kingdoms. She showed that a woman could own and control property and power, and wield it as skillfully as any man. Number 3. Does a leader's gender define their ability to rule? Around 1479 BC, the Pharaoh of Egypt died. His heir was a young boy, Thutmose III. As was traditional, the boy's stepmother and aunt, the pharaoh's widow, became the regent. Her name was Hatshepsut. A regency was supposed to be a temporary arrangement. The woman holds power until the male heir is old enough to rule. Hatshepsut had other ideas. Within a few years, she did something unprecedented. She had herself crowned pharaoh and ruled as the king of Egypt for over 2 decades. This was a revolutionary act. Ancient Egypt was a society where women could hold high status, they could own property and run businesses. But the role of pharaoh, the divine king, who maintained the order of the cosmos, was fundamentally male. The king was the embodiment of the god Horus. There was no ideological or religious precedent for a female king. Hatshepsut knew she had to be clever to legitimize her rule. She did not depose her stepson. She ruled alongside him as the senior co-ruler. But she was the one with the real power. To overcome the gender barrier, she and her advisors crafted a brilliant propaganda campaign. She began to be depicted in a new way. In statues and carvings, she was gradually transformed. At first, she was shown as a woman, but in the pharaoh's traditional regalia, like the kilt and the false beard. Over time, her image became more and more masculine. She was shown with a male body, broad shoulders, and a narrow waist. The inscriptions, however, often used female grammar referring to her as His Majesty herself. It was a complex and sophisticated way of blending male and female identities to fit the male-only ideology of kingship. She wasn't pretending to be a man. She was presenting herself as a new kind of being, a female king. She also claimed divine birth. She had elaborate stories carved on the walls of her magnificent mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari. These stories told how the god Amun-Ra had taken the form of her father, the pharaoh Thutmose I, and visited her mother. The inscriptions proclaimed that the god himself had declared that Hatshepsut should be the king. This was a masterstroke. It made her rule not an act of personal ambition, but the will of the gods. Unlike many pharaohs, Hatshepsut's reign was not known for war. It was a long period of peace and prosperity. Her focus was on building and trade. She launched a massive building program throughout Egypt, restoring old temples and constructing new ones. Her mortuary temple is still one of the wonders of ancient architecture. Her most famous achievement was a great trading expedition to the land of Punt, a distant and semi-mythical place, probably on the coast of modern-day Somalia or Eritrea. It was a huge and risky undertaking. The expedition was a great success. Her ships returned laden with gold, ivory, exotic animals, and most importantly, live myrrh trees. These were planted in the gardens of her temple. The entire story of the expedition was carved in detail on the temple walls. It was a major economic and propaganda victory. Hatshepsut ruled for about 22 years. She was one of Egypt's most successful pharaohs. She brought peace, prosperity, and architectural glory to her land. After her death, her stepson Thutmose III finally ruled alone. Late in his reign, for reasons that are still debated, he had Hatshepsut's name and image erased from many monuments. For centuries, her existence was almost completely forgotten. It was only when archaeologists in the 19th and 20th centuries began to piece together the evidence that her story was rediscovered. Hatshepsut's reign is a powerful answer to the question of gender and leadership. She proved that a woman could perform the role of king just as well, if not better, than a man. She faced the ultimate glass ceiling, and through sheer political skill and imagination, she broke it. Number 2, should a ruler embrace science over superstition? In the 18th century, smallpox was one of the most terrifying diseases on Earth. It was highly contagious and killed about 30% of the people it infected. The survivors were often left with deep scars or blindness. There was no cure. In Russia, the disease was rampant. It killed as many as 2 million people a year. It even killed the young Tsar Peter II. People were terrified, but they were also fatalistic. They saw the disease as an act of God. Catherine the Great, the Empress of Russia, saw it differently. She saw it as a scientific problem that needed a scientific solution. Catherine was a German princess who had married the heir to the Russian throne. She came to power in 1762 after a coup that removed her unpopular husband. She was a ruler of the Enlightenment. She corresponded with philosophers like Voltaire. She believed in reason, progress, and science, and she decided to use her absolute power to fight smallpox. She had heard about a new controversial technique called inoculation or variolation. It was not a vaccine as we know it today. The technique involved taking a small amount of pus from a fresh smallpox sore and deliberately introducing it into a healthy person through a small cut in their skin. The idea was to give the person a mild case of the disease, which would then give them immunity for life. It was risky. About 2% of people who were inoculated died from the procedure, but this was far better than the 30% death rate from catching the disease naturally. In Russia, the idea was met with deep suspicion. Doctors were against it. The Russian Orthodox Church was against it, calling it an ungodly practice. The common people were terrified of it. Catherine knew that she could not just issue an order, she had to lead by example. In 1768, she made a courageous decision. She would be inoculated herself, and she would have her son and heir Paul inoculated as well. She secretly sent for an English doctor named Thomas Dimsdale, who was an expert in the technique. He came to St. Petersburg. In the middle of the night, Catherine and her son underwent the procedure. She understood the political risk. If she or her son died, it would be a catastrophe for her reign and for the cause of science in Russia. She took precautions. She had a relay of horses waiting to whisk Dr. Dimsdale out of the country to safety if the procedure went wrong. But it didn't go wrong. Catherine and Paul developed a mild fever and a few spots, and then they recovered. They were immune. Catherine's gamble had paid off. She immediately used it as a massive public relations campaign. She made Dr. Dimsdale a baron of the Russian Empire. She declared the day of her recovery a national holiday. She wrote letters to Voltaire and other leaders in Europe telling them what she had done. Her personal example broke the tide of fear and superstition. Suddenly, inoculation became fashionable. The Russian nobility lined up to have it done. Catherine set up a national program to make inoculation available across the empire. It is estimated that her campaign saved tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands, of lives in her own lifetime. By the early 1800s, about 2 million people in Russia had been inoculated. Catherine the Great's decision was a landmark moment in the history of public health. She was one of the first world leaders to champion a scientific medical procedure on a national scale. She used her personal courage and her skill at public relations to overcome widespread fear and ignorance. She showed that a ruler had a responsibility to embrace science for the good of her people. It was a thoroughly modern view of the relationship between government, science, and public welfare. Number one, can a leader be successful without a spouse? For nearly her entire 45-year reign, Queen Elizabeth I of England was defined by a single question: who will you marry? From the moment she took the throne in 1558, her council, her parliament, and the kings of Europe all expected her to marry. For a queen, marriage was not a personal choice. It was a political and dynastic necessity. A husband would provide military and political support. A child would provide an heir and secure the succession. An unmarried queen was seen as weak, vulnerable, and a failure of her duty. Elizabeth listened to all this advice, and for 45 years, she ignored it. Her decision to remain single was the central strategy of her reign. It was a radical and dangerous choice, but it was also a brilliant one. She had seen what marriage did to female rulers. Her own sister Mary I had married King Philip II of Spain. The marriage was deeply unpopular and dragged England into Spain's wars. It made Mary a junior partner in her own kingdom. Elizabeth was determined that this would not happen to her. She declared early in her reign that she was married to England. She turned her unmarried status into her greatest diplomatic weapon. For decades, she played the marriage game. She would entertain proposals from various European princes. There was Philip II of Spain, Archduke Charles of Austria, and two different French princes, the Duke of Anjou and the Duke of Alencon. By keeping them all guessing, by never saying a final yes or no, she kept them all on her side. A country that hoped to win her hand in marriage was a country that was unlikely to attack her. She used the prospect of marriage to build alliances and neutralize threats, all without ever giving up her power. This was incredibly difficult. Her parliament repeatedly begged her to marry and name a successor. They were terrified of a civil war breaking out if she died without an heir. She responded with some of the most powerful speeches of her reign. She told them that she was a virgin queen and that this was her special calling. She crafted a powerful public image. She was not a weak, unmarried woman. She was a queen wedded to her people, a mother to her nation. This cult of the Virgin Queen replaced the need for a real husband and family. It made her seem both powerful and untouchable. Her single status meant that she was always the sole center of power. There was no king consort to challenge her authority. There were no in-laws to promote their own interests. All loyalty was directed to her and her alone. She was a master at managing the ambitious men at her court, like William Cecil and Robert Dudley. She played them off against each other, but she never let any of them control her. Of course, the pressure was immense. The negotiation for her marriage to the French Duke of Alencon went on for years in the 1570s and 80s. She was in her 40s. It was her last chance to have a child. The public, and many on her council, were fiercely against the match with a foreign Catholic prince. In the end, Elizabeth turned him down. She chose to face the future alone, without a direct heir. It was a huge political gamble. She died in 1603, having ruled for nearly half a century. Her reign, the Elizabethan age, is remembered as a golden era for England. She had defeated the Spanish Armada, sponsored exploration around the globe, and presided over a cultural flourishing that included William Shakespeare. And she had done it all on her own terms. She was succeeded peacefully by the son of her cousin Mary, Queen of Scots. The Civil War everyone feared never happened. Elizabeth I proved that a woman could rule a major European power alone. She showed that marriage was not a requirement for a successful reign. She turned what everyone saw as her greatest weakness, her gender, and her single status into her greatest strength. Her life demonstrated a profoundly modern idea that a woman's worth and ability are not dependent on her relationship to a man.